Welcome to Breaking the Echo Chamber podcast. I'm Manuel da Costa, the founder of Efestra, and this is the Experimentation podcast for people who actually do the work. Not the glossy conference version, not the vendor success theater, but the messy reality of building experimentation programs that survive beyond the pilot phase. Each week, we'll explore the gaps between what gets celebrated online and at conferences and what actually drives sustainable results. This podcast is all about breaking the myths that persist in this industry and keep the experimentation industry back from achieving its true potential. Now, some episodes will be my take on where the industry is broken. Others will feature leaders who've learned to see past the noise. So if you're ready to hear what experimentation looks like when nobody's trying to sell you something, you're in the right place. Now, on to our episode. Welcome to today's show. This is Manuel da Costa, and in this episode, joining me is Jonny Longden from Spiro. Welcome, Jonny.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. I've been following your work on LinkedIn. I've seen your posts over the years. And in this podcast, we kind of challenge the status quo. I think a lot of your views kind of align with our thinking, but I also wanted to go a bit deeper into your thoughts and understand more about your viewpoints on the industry, the challenges we face, and really, ultimately, how do we get out of these challenges as well? Because experimentation, CRO, A/B testing, this industry is not a new industry anymore. It's picked up over the years. So really keen to hear your thoughts on that. But before we get into that, for people that don't know you, could you please give us a short introduction of yourself, please?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm Jonny. I'm currently Chief Growth Officer of Spiro. Spiro is an experimentation agency and consultancy. We particularly focus on the deep expertise to help clients do it really well. And increasingly, we do a lot more consultancy, particularly around growth experimentation and AI and things like that. I have a really long background in experimentation. I've been running A/B tests since A/B testing was invented, about 20 years or 18 years, something like that now. And before that, I was in more kind of like offline experimentation with direct mail and stuff like that. So I've done that ever since. I have been agency and client side and management consultancy. So I've done it all. I've kind of like flip around. I built the first experimentation function at Sky. I was the e-commerce director of a hotel business. I've built other agency teams 3 times now. So yeah, that's me.
A lot of experience there. And one thing that caught my eye last year was when you put out this manifesto of experimentation. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's linked in the show notes as well as on Jonny's LinkedIn page. But summarize that for us, Jonny. And it's been a year since that manifesto has come out. I'd love to know, have your viewpoints changed? Is there anything you'd add to that manifesto? And what are the challenges that you see coming up over and over again from working with different companies?
Yeah, I wrote that as the sort of culmination of 20 years of gradually coming to realize that the vast majority of what gets called experimentation really doesn't make any sense at all. And you kind of have to really have done it for a long time to come to that conclusion. But it really doesn't. And I mean, the history of it's interesting as well. So, as I mentioned, I've been doing it since it was invented. So I saw the early history of it. And from my perspective, what happened initially was that, what you've got to realize is back in that in those days, very few people had like a CMS or anything like that. Like, businesses could not do anything to their website. They had to go and ask IT, that being the same kind of IT guy in the basement who would fix your laptop. And so you had marketing teams with literally no control over anything on the website other than, very, very slow IT processes. And A/B testing tools were invented, and they were suddenly very interesting. Nothing, for no reason to do with the A/B testing itself. Like, basically the thing that was interesting was all of a sudden people could do things to the site using JavaScript injection, and that was kind of way more important. And you had these marketing teams going, "Oh God, we can actually do things using these tools." And then you had consultants and agencies going, "Hang on, well, we can sell this to these marketing teams." And they started to use the A/B testing functionality as a way to sell that. So in the early days, the vast majority of consultants would come to you as a client and say, "You're not going to pay me anything. I'm going to put this tool on your site. I'm going to optimize things, make changes, and I'm going to charge you a percentage of the annualized value of the things that work." And so the A/B testing functionality was really a way for consultants to charge clients. But that whole thing gave rise to what became CRO, and everything, all the kind of funny language of winning and losing and annualized revenue calculations and all that kind of stuff just simply came from that strange thing of consultants selling that to clients. And then time went by, people stopped selling like that, but all of that stuff just stayed, and it just stayed in the industry, and it makes no sense whatsoever. It really doesn't. So like fast forward to today, and you have this situation where you've still got even quite big in-house experimentation functions that still kind of operate on the same principles. They're still got win rates and things like that, and they've got targets to achieve of ROI and revenue generation and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense. The foundations of it don't make any sense. You wouldn't go into a scientific laboratory and hear people talking about winning and losing and things like that. They really, if you sort of take all that away, what are you trying to do? You're just trying to innovate the business. But experimentation has become this really sort of like tactical commercial thing where there's C-suite and people like that think of it as a P&L line item. So like, we've got an A/B testing tool, we've got somebody who can use it. What's the output? What am I seeing as the revenue output? And that just doesn't make any sense. Because it doesn't in and of itself generate any revenue, in the same way that research doesn't in and of itself generate any revenue. It's helping you do something else. It's helping you innovate and grow and all that kind of stuff. So, and I think there's a crisis really at the moment in experimentation, which is that senior leadership, they don't consciously know any of this that I'm talking about, but they are, in one sense, thinking of it in this CRO terms and thinking, it's a revenue generating thing, but at the same time, not really trusting it, and not really trusting that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And they're right to, because it doesn't do that. And so everybody's just immensely confused about what it is. And it just, it kind of takes you a long time of working in it to come to these conclusions. And you really have to speak to a lot of people to understand this. And meanwhile, you've got some very diligent people kind of beavering away doing CRO. And it does deliver some value. It's not that it's not completely useless. It delivers value. You're testing things and making changes on websites that are improving results. It's just simply that it's a fraction of the potential that it has, in the broadest sense of the word experimentation. So that's like why I wrote that manifesto. I wanted to really take a step back and sort of think, what is wrong with it? What are the things that are wrong with it? And how can you sort of rip it all up and start again, really?
I think that the points that you touched on as well. So it's something that we've come to see within our own workings as well with different teams, we call it the trust gap, right? So you have all these teams running experiments, even doing the research as part of the experimentation process, but there's a massive disconnect between how experimentation is perceived and the results, whether there's any trust in the results or the outcomes. You have stakeholders and the senior leadership making decisions based on gut feeling, leaving out all the experimentation findings or the insights that are coming from it.
Yeah.
But I think we need to go back a little bit to how experimentation was sold, right? So again, what you say is spot on, and it's the same things we see in our findings as well. Experimentation is really tactical. It's kind of pigeonholed in this A/B testing, CRO. You go and run your test and present your findings, and that's the end of that story. But there's so much missing potential on that. We're on the same page. But do you think it's how experimentation, well, I say experimentation as this big picture, but really it's A/B testing CRO, has been sold by the earlier vendors in the market? We're talking about like going back to 2010, 2011, and you would see these testing tool vendors position CRO as a magic bullet, run a quick A/B test, switch some button colors, throw in some things in a WYSIWYG editor, and you'll be printing money. And that narrative is kind of gone into the market. So you get this perception of what CRO is based on what they've been sold, but then the reality is different. And I think what's happening on the specialist, on the practitioner level, is they're caught in that loop. It's a value trap, right? You got to go in, prove your value to get more resources and strategy, but then you're stuck in that because you don't have enough resources to prove the value.
Yeah.
You're back in that loop again. So
Yeah, and it's a strange. It's there's a very strange thing with A/B testing that you can physically make these ROI calculations. So because of the nature of what it is, and you've got A and B, and you can compare them, you can make really detailed forecasts of revenue, and everybody does it. Everybody says, like, we ran this test, it's a 3% uplift in conversion, so annualized that's going to mean we're going to make an extra 20 million pounds.
yeah.
And because you can do it, people do it, they always have done it, and so now there's just this massive expectation of that's what it is, and that what you're doing is running these tests and they're generating revenue, and then finance want to see the revenue, and finance want to see how you're going to increase the revenue and all that kind of stuff. But it does not make sense at all. Like, it makes as much sense as trying to calculate the monthly revenue forecast ROI of people development, or something like that. It really doesn't make any sense, and it's just unfortunate that you just mathematically can do it,
Yeah.
that now everyone's stuck into doing it.
Yeah.
And just back to what you were saying before, like there is that is the perception that senior management particularly have of what it is. And it's not a conscious perception. They don't sort of they've not really consciously spent any time thinking about it. They've just been subtly, subconsciously indoctrinated into believing that's what it is through many years of having worked in different businesses with a CRO team and things like that. Nobody stops to actually really think about it. They just, it's like they've got a latent understanding of what PPC is and SEO is and CRO, and they sort of treat it in the same way. So it's like, you know, PPC, we're spending this, we're getting this back. What are we spending here? What are we getting back? And that's all they really want to know is, like, we're doing CRO. What are we getting back? And then when somebody presents those numbers and they think about it, they think this doesn't really stack up. Like, what if this was working? Why are we not seeing the impact? And PPC, I mean, arguably PPC is not really as good as people think it is, because there's a lot of cannibalization in it and stuff. However, it is much easier to see that, we're spending this and it drives this traffic, and then we get this money, actual cash money from this in the, and when you even slightly lift the lid on CRO, you can't do that in the same way. You can't finance it look at the finance in the same way. So that's where that trust gap comes from, that, it's like, as soon as anybody really thinks about it, they're like, hang on a minute, what is actually going on here. Is it really delivering the value that it is?
Yeah.
But again, it's all complete nonsense, because the real, like, when ultimately what this comes down to is a misunderstanding of the word experimentation. The word experimentation should just mean developing your business in a way that you're using evidence and feedback loops to understand what actually works. And that's a million miles away from CRO. And you have this really strange phenomenon when you look at it, that you've got businesses, big businesses, where they might have like quite a significant investment in an experimentation team, or center of excellence or whatever. And when you really stand back and you look at it, like, ultimately what that's doing is it's helping to drive decisions about development, about front end development and things like that. So when you stand back and you look at all the investment that's going into engineering and development, you've got a proportion of it where a team of people are really diligently testing things and worrying about MDEs and statistical significance to make sure that things work. And then the rest of it, they just do it. Someone just goes, "That's a good idea, let's do it," and then they just put it into a roadmap. And those things are those things are way bigger than those things.
Yeah.
So it's like, why are you testing these small things and not testing any of the other stuff? So you've got a business will be like, messing around with buttons on the website, and then they just in the boardroom go, "Do you know what? We should like launch into this new market and build a big distribution center there." Yeah, let's do that. So why are you testing that and not that? And like all that, it just, when you really think about it, doesn't make any sense at all. So that's why really have to kind of go right back to, like, what does experimentation actually mean?
Yeah.
I'm the Since I wrote that article, I found what I think is a clearer way to get people's head around it, and it's by using the analogy of the Apollo space missions. So, if you think about that, like, for one, as arguably the greatest achievement of humanity, getting somebody to the moon and back, technologically and everything, it's, why would you not want to learn from that, right? But why did that work? Well, it wasn't because there was an experiment. It wasn't because the people involved had the ability to experiment. It was the organization and the management within it. So, in simple terms, JFK said, "Let's get somebody to the moon and back within 10 years." And then they had to spin up a whole program where the challenge was to go, how do we do this? How do we organize these people to test the things that they need to test in a coordinated manner, to bring that learning back into a centralized view of the mission, and to run iterative test flights that are, bringing all of that learning together to achieve that goal. And so the whole thing can be described as experimentation. It was the organization of it, and the drive to achieve something strategically, that is the description of experimentation. Now, conversely, in modern business, experimentation means having an experimentation tool and having somebody who can run it. So if you asked any business, like if you asked maybe the CEO of any business, "Do you do experimentation?" They'd go, "Yeah, we've got Optimizely,
Yeah.
and we've got a team of people who do it. So we do experimentation." But no, you don't, because imagine if JFK had said that, and then what they did was go, "Okay, let's give everybody the tools to experiment and have a culture of experimentation, and like just let everybody go off and test things." They would not have got very far.
Yeah.
So experimentation, where are you locating that term? And the business world locates it in the experiment.
Yeah.
And the fact that experiments are running, not in the concept of experimentation being, how do you manage all those ideas and make sure they're strategically aligned, and make sure that you're testing things and learning and pivoting towards a strategic goal.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, really, we have to really strip back the concept of experimentation and look at how that management works. And I know, you call it governance, same thing, but that's the bit that's missing, and that's the bit that almost nobody really does.
I think there is a recognition in the industry. As I said, you've talked about it for the past few years. I've been talking about it for quite a while as well, about, well, even this phrase culture of experimentation is become such a tacky word, if anything. It's if you say, oh, do you have culture of experimentation? Now people assume that because they've got people testing, they've got a culture of experimentation. But I want to go back to a post that you put out the other day, which was on product testing. So the trend over the last few years has been giving broadening the horizons of experimentation into product, right? And on paper, if you ask companies, are your product teams testing? Yep, we're increasing our velocity. But there's one thing missing, which is what you brought up in that post. So do you want to summarize that again? Do you know which I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think ultimately it comes down to the product model itself. And really what happens in a lot of product teams is that testing is a technical thing that happens as you launch something to market. So mostly what happens is, the product team are getting requests from stakeholders, putting them into roadmaps, and then they build them, and then they sort of feature release test them as they go out. And that is not experimentation. That is just simply kind of sense checking what you're doing before you do it. And the big problem is that you have not validated whether or not you should have built the thing in the first place. So you've got a product team might spend 3 weeks building like this sort of full feature and then testing it. And for a start, nobody's going to want that to fail, because if you're a product team, then if that fails, you've just wasted 3 weeks of a whole product team, um, which is a lot of money, on something that didn't work. So they will find a way for it to work. And that's why you get, these kind of product analysts who are like, segmenting everything to the nth degree to go, well, it didn't work overall, but it did work on mobile on a Tuesday, so therefore it's good, and stuff like that. So nobody allows it to fail, because they don't want to they don't want to have wasted all that time, and for it to look like the product team is a pointless waste of time. So it really isn't any kind of experimentation at all. But the other thing is that, mostly the product teams would be resistant to it in the first place anyway. So you've often got a center of excellence, or like a team that's trying to kind of push experimentation and trying to get product teams to experiment. And it's the last thing they want to do, because of that very reason. It's like somebody marking their homework.
Yeah.
And when they've invested that time and sort of like enjoyed the process of building it, and gone through design processes, nobody wants that to be kind of poo-poo with experimentation. And then you get the political thing of them thinking that the experimentation team are just kind of trying to piss on their bonfire and all that sort of stuff. But it's fundamentally, again, a strange concept of experimentation. The way experimentation in product should work is really that experimentation and product are exactly the same thing. There shouldn't really be a distinction between those two words. Ideally, that stakeholder who originally asked for that idea says, I think we're thinking of doing this, and the product team should go, brilliant, we'll take that. And they first of all break it down into the smallest possible thing that they can do, which might be a back of a fag packet business case, might be just a little bit of analysis or something like that. Then it may stack up or it may not. If it does, then what can you do? Like a painted door test, or like just a bit of a user survey, or internal very rough prototype with internal people, and then so you're gradually increasing the effort as you become more confident in what it is and what it should do, and that is not the way most product teams work. And the reason being, which is the interesting part, is that the product model itself is not the product model. And I think this is particularly key in Europe, which is that, what most companies think of as a product model is actually just an IT model with people's job titles changed to product managers. And the fundamental politics of how it works, of how external stakeholders are requesting things, still exists, and the product team are just taking requests and putting them into roadmaps. There isn't the autonomy for the product team to actually be reviewing and validating things, and and going through that process. So that's the bit that really needs to be fixed. Is, businesses like that need to sit down collectively and go, what is IT? How do we work? Yeah, is IT just a kind of a functional servant that does what it's told?
Yeah.
In which case, then whoever it is that's telling them what to do has to take on this whole responsibility. Or is it a full true product model where the product team are autonomous, they're going to get given objectives, they're responsible for driving innovation? Or is it somewhere in between? And those things are, none of those things are right or wrong. They might be, but the one might be right in one business, another might be right in another business. But unless the business has had that explicit conversation and everybody has the same mental model of what the IT function is and how it's working, then there is no way forward for that sort of experimentation and who's responsible for it and all that kind of stuff. And again, you generally have this sort of sticking plaster of a little experimentation team in the corner, just like pestering people to do more experiments, without there being any like real meaning to it.
That's it. And I find a lot of these kind of contributor vanity metrics, right? Looking busy, that they're running more experiments. So look at us. We've scaled experimentation from 10 experiments a quarter to, whatever, 100 or something. But then you scratch the surface a little more and you see a lot of these experiments are just checkboxes or doing it right at the end. And this is one of the reasons why, oversight and governance is really important, because you have to be able to ensure that those experiments are actually experiments in the first place. But I want to go back to that point that it keeps coming back to. You and I, again, we're in the same wavelength when we talk about these things. And a lot of people that I've spoken to that are in product teams, in experimentation teams, or whatever model they operate under, have an understanding of this, an intellectual understanding that it's broken, but they're a cog in the machine. They have to keep going. How do you change something like this? Because this has been going on for quite a while, and now it's getting further polluted, if I can use that word, by the fact that you've got these vendors pushing AI solutions on top of what is already a chaotic way of experimentation. So how do we fix this mess before it's completely unfixable, if any? Or is it unfixable already?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the ultimate answer is that the conversation has to elevate to much more senior areas of the business. You, as exactly you say, like a lot of people who've been in experimentation for a long time intrinsically know all of this, and are frustrated that they are kind of tasked with doing something that's not what they should be doing. And I speak to a lot of people in the industry all the time, and that is the number one frustration, is that they're ultimately being given objectives that don't really make sense, but they inherently see there is this kind of enormous value that could be realized if people saw it in a different way. And yet it is really hard for practitioners within businesses to have these conversations and to get up to the levels above where they need to have these conversations. And I've been there myself. It's very hard. It's, even if you can access the C-suite, you get like 30 seconds of airtime, like, to say something, and like, how do you say all this in that kind of time? And so it is really hard. But somewhere in amongst that, our industry and vendors, and we have to start talking to a more senior level, because the message is, I mean, I think the way to do it is that the message is a new message. The message is, really about growth and business success. And one of the really interesting things is the emergence of the growth function in businesses. Again, it's more sort of diligently done in the US, and then it's sort of tends to be more superficially copied in Europe. But where it works really well, you've got, growth function where there is perhaps a chief growth officer, and then marketing, product, and customer operations will directly line under that growth function. And that has this enormous potential for experimentation to be seen in a really fresh, different way, because all you're saying is like, you already want to grow. You've identified the business structures that need to exist in order to pull the right levers to drive growth. So just put experimentation into that mix, and that makes so much sense. That makes a lot of sense in comparison to the whole kind of CRO thing. So, but whether or not they have that function or that structure, that's the same sort of message. It's, really the way I kind of try and talk about it at this level is to say, what does the word experimentation mean to you? It probably means somewhere in the back of your head, either A/B testing, which is super limited to just one very specific small thing in the grand scheme of a business, or it just means vaguely trying stuff. So, a lot of people are talking about experimenting with AI at the moment, but what they mean is just like everybody messing around with ChatGPT and seeing what happens. And either way, there is no real organization. What the experimentation should mean, how are you learning about how to grow your business in a rigorous, sort of structured, coordinated, organized way, in the same way as the Apollo space mission. That they didn't, just go, oh yeah, let's just try a few things and see what happens. There's a lot of organization to it. So that's the message, is that experimentation should be a kind of a rigorous approach, an organized approach. And that's what it means. That's what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean any specific way of testing anything or any kind of technology to test anything.
Yeah.
But like really, how do we start to get that message to more senior people and more senior level?
Absolutely.
That's the question. I never have the exact answer, but that's the challenge, I'd say.
Again, a similar finding from our end as well. It's the fact that, as I said, we've been talking to the specialist level quite a long time with that intellectual understanding. But the thing that frustrates me most is there is a lot of narrative in this industry that's trying to inflate what an experimentation specialist has to do. So, go and build culture of experimentation, go and evangelize it, go and do this. And so it puts so much pressure on that individual. And at the
Yeah.
same time, on the conference circuit, on LinkedIn, you get this Instagram version of how everyone's achieved culture of experimentation, when really they've just given people the keys to a tool, right?
Yeah.
They've not really run experiments. So there's this massive disconnect again between what's happening on stage and on LinkedIn and then the reality of it. And I think people coming into the industry are getting bamboozled with this information. They see all this and they think that's what they need to aim to. Another thing, which is like the bigger companies with big budgets, right? You're talking about the Airbnbs, the Netflix and all, and they've got this perfect model, right? That's something that I find, again, is just pushing the narrative down that you need to be like them, when in reality, it shouldn't be that. It's your organization doesn't lack the technical know-how to do it. It doesn't lack the tools. It lacks the structured way of thinking of how experimentation needs to run. And that can only happen top down. So like there's this ongoing narrative over the last few years, right? There are a few people that'll push out this thing, make experimentation fun, make experimentation really cool, and people will buy into it. And I think from our point of view, it needs structure, it needs rigor, it needs a reboot of experimentation as what it can do as well. So Spiro has run like a benchmark in 2025. They run one every year. It's available on on the website as well. But what have you spotted in the 2025 findings? Are there any concerns? Are there any interesting new? Is there any progress? What are your findings in that report?
Yeah, I think at a high level, um, the the industry has matured greatly. So, there's a lot that has come leaps and bounds where, in a lot of businesses, CRO has become experimentation, and that is a step in the right direction. Like, it's going the right way. So there has been enormous progress, and if you go back even like 5 to 10 years ago, you had really, like quite a lot of businesses where CRO was a person stuck in the corner of a marketing team using WYSIWYG editors to do button color testing and things like that. And that was an enormous proportion of people doing CRO were that. And they had no influence or power over IT other than just submitting tickets. And, so we've come a long way from those days where, A/B testing is now within product environments and things like that. And the Airbnb booking.coms and that sort of thing are the absolute sort of culmination of that, in that, it's really sort of fundamental to how engineering works and how front end works. But the key thing is that it is still simply just front end. I wonder how I wonder to what extent that Airbnb are experimenting with things that have got nothing to do with their front end, like how exactly they are obtaining new inventory and stuff like that, and more kind of internal business operations and that sort of stuff. That would be true experimentation. But the things that are held aloft as the greatest things of experimentation are just A/B testing done really, really well, and like really embedded really well, and all that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of overarching thing, is that maturity is happening. I think the biggest thing as well, and this comes from the surveys, but also having spoken to a lot of people who filled in the surveys, is exactly what I was talking about before, which is that there is this fundamental gap where people kind of understand the value that it could have, and yet they're not understood by the rest of the business, by the senior people in the business, and the structure and organization of the business and politics of the business is not conducive to what they're trying to do. So those are the biggest challenges, really, is that a lot of people have. But again, it just really sort of supports everything that we've been saying here, which is that really there needs to be a bit of a wiping the slate clean, really, and for people for businesses just to kind of see it in a different way.
Yeah, I agree with that, in the sense that we've tried this where practitioners, we've been telling them to go and evangelize and pitch this other way. It's not working. It's time collectively there needs to be an elevation of the message that goes out to businesses and what experimentation is.
Yeah.
If we're sat here together again in a year's time, do you think that'll change? What needs to happen between now and the next year, next 2 years, 5 years, for this whole conversation to change?
Yeah, I think there's some things that like are really, really, really hard to change, and that drive a lot of this. One of them is simply the way that people are hired and remunerated in businesses. Virtually every business in the world is a form of hierarchical management, and when people brought into those environments at senior levels are ultimately hired for their past experience. So when you are hired and paid a lot of money for your past experience, you have to justify that salary by bringing your past experience, which means bringing your opinions. So that, unfortunately, is not going to change anytime soon, and that is where the concept of the hippo comes from. And it's nobody's fault. It's just the way it is. Like you have to come in and say, like, I know what I'm doing. I know this. I know what we should do. I'm going to make these decisions. So that's one of the big problems at the heart of it. The other is the commercial nature of the way software is sold and things like that. So, a lot of this issue comes from the way services and software have been sold in the past, and the messages that those commercial entities need in order to be able to successfully sell. And again, that's nobody's fault. It's the way the business world works. So, I can sit around talking about how the Apollo mission worked, but at the end of the day, these sort of commercial things about business and capitalism, ultimately, at the end of the day, creates a bit of a problem. So, it's always going to be a challenge. But I think the biggest sort of potential, as I mentioned before, is this idea of growth and the restructuring of business around growth. And that offers the potential for these silos to break down and for there to be much more holistic view of innovation in a business, and how it's driven across kind of cross-functional areas. Because even at the moment, like product, you've got in some businesses very advanced product functions that tick off all Marty Kagan's boxes and that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day it's still product, and marketing is separate and customer is separate, and all that kind of stuff. So there's limited stuff that you can do. So I think as businesses wake up to the idea that there has to be this general function that is looking at innovation and growth, and that the different stuff that needs to line under that sits there, then that is, promising. And even if businesses don't actually move to that themselves, then, typically what happens is they find some way of emulating it slightly. So hopefully the concepts will kind of translate. And we're as an agency, we're much more kind of moving towards the idea of helping people with that, really, with the idea of growth, experimentation, and that potentially is helping them with the structure of the organization and the way that the operating system works and things like that as well. But that's where experimentation should lie. So I hope in 5 years that concept has made some traction, and that there are some of the poster child stories that we tell that at the moment at the Airbnb and Booking.coms are about that they're about how experimentation is sitting like right at the strategic driving seat of the business, and that it's feeding into multifunctional different areas of the business.
Yeah. What is the responsibility of vendors, consultants, and individuals to achieve that? Because again, as I said, it's easy, again, to hypothesize what that future should look like, or expect what that should look like. But then we're still caught up in loops with, you have like agencies that are still promoting that old version of CRO quick wins. We'll run 10 tests for you and you'll make X million more on the back of that. Or vendors testing tools that are selling their solution as, here's, just slap on this tool, WYSIWYG AI, whatever it is, and you will succeed. So what's the responsibility of all the players in this?
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, consultancy and agency will change with what is with what's sellable, with what you can sell. And I would say there already is really significant evidence that kind of old model of outsourced CRO is declining, and has been for a few years now, particularly as people in-house more. But again, because of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of businesses like waking up to not really trusting the results out of this stuff, and unfortunately with agency there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of agencies that have CRO on their website, and there are very, very few that actually do it really well and actually deliver it well and actually deliver value. So that kind of exacerbates the problem that a lot of people have probably been exposed to. Oh, we did CRO with our dev agency and it didn't seem to work. Well, it was probably a developer who once ran an A/B test 5 years ago and then say, like, we can do CRO. So I think, like you talk about, it's hard because you talk about a responsibility. Commercial businesses like agencies and vendors will always just do what it takes to make a sale. So the responsibility, I think, kind of comes into more of the thought leadership space and the social media space, that we need to start collectively being braver at having these sorts of conversations and talking about all this sort of stuff, and trying to elevate it to the level that this more senior people are interested in.
Yeah.
This concept of this talk was the echo chamber, and it is absolutely true. You can go to like one of the biggest experimentation CRO conferences in the world, and everybody there is a practitioner, and everybody's talking about this stuff. But so what? Nobody who really kind of matters is going to hear it.
Absolutely.
It's about getting that conversation higher. And vendors, vendors have the same opportunity. I mean, ultimately, tech vendors want to expand their reach within a business. They want more people using it, more people gaining value from it. And so there is exactly the same opportunity if it's done right, that the functionality can become greater, and the reason for doing it, the reason for using it can become greater, and it can appeal to more different people and things like that, which is ultimately what they want. So done right, it can be just as lucrative as what a lot of them have been trying to do with the culture of experimentation, which is really give everybody a login.
Fair point. On that note, Jonny, thank you for joining me on this episode of Breaking the Echo Chamber, and we should connect in the future again and see where the industry is then. But thank you so much for your time. And if anyone wants to find you online and they don't know how to find you, how do they get in touch?
So LinkedIn is the easiest way. So follow me or connect on LinkedIn. And I am always open to everything. So if I want to chat about anything, doesn't have to be anything that would result in a sale for anybody. Just let me know, and I'm always open to having a conversation with anybody. So
perfect. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of Breaking the Echo Chamber. If today's conversation highlighted gaps in the way your organization approaches experimentation, you're not alone. At Efestra, we've built the systematic governance platform that ensures that your experiments actually drive strategic decisions, not just more data. We help experimentation leaders move beyond the chaos of disconnected tools and fragmented insights to build programs that scale sustainably and deliver what matters most: strategic business decisions at the highest level. So check us out at efestra.com to see how we're helping organizations close the trust gap between experimentation promises and business reality. Until next time, my name is Manuel da Costa, the founder of Efestra. Keep questioning the noise.